So you know what would be the most exciting video we could possibly do today is let's do a PowerPoint lecture for an 8-year-old phone game. That sounds like a great idea. What could possibly go wrong? But all jokes aside, we are doing a PowerPoint lecture for an 8-year-old phone game today because I know a lot of you are still struggling, but maybe not the endgame players, but I know a lot of beginner to mid-game players are struggling with artifacts. Many of you don't even have artifacts on your units because you're like, oh, I don't have good enough runes yet. Well, I mean, you don't have any artifacts. You should at least get artifacts for your units instead of just running around with no artifacts on things. I mean, you're like, oh, I lost this battle. You don't even have artifacts. Just put any artifacts on. Any artifacts and upgrade them will make your team stronger. However, there are I was gonna say there are some situations where you want specific subs in your artifact. You always want specific subs in your artifacts. So this is just a little cheat sheet for many of you. It's just a general guideline, just a general rule of thumb. There's a lot of nuances. Actually, I think I have some disclaimers and whatever, because I always have disclaimers and everything. But this should give you a general guideline too. I don't want to say them twice, right? There's no point in that. General guideline to follow for determining the artifacts for your units as an early to mid-game player. There are some nuances and exceptions to rules. However, this should cover the majority of units. For most of us, we don't have perfect artifacts, so it's very common to have dead stats on some artifacts. Example, skill 4 crit damage, it's like samurais, and that's basically it. There's a couple more, but basically most units don't use it. On healer or bomb damage on a unit with no bombs, this is very common unless you are endgame with 50,000 artifact dungeon runs under your belt. Don't worry about a couple dead stats, just try to use the best you can, and remember you can always use artifact conversion to change one dead property on each. Let's continue. So first off, we have Trikaru. Trikaru. We have Trikaru and Vertiheal. So these are the primary stats. Any of these little green, if it looks like this and it's like all green and lit up, these are the main stats you want to go for on the artifacts. Co-op attack damage, because they're all going to be attacking together. Skill 1 crit damage, skill 2 crit damage. Crit damage to the enemy's HP is more or less. Vertiheal is going to be your main damage dealer in this Trikaru Vertiheal team. The Ikarus are not doing as much damage as Vertiheal. Vertiheal is doing a lot every time they pull him in, right? Then we have damage dealt on fire, using it for dragons. Damage dealt on wind, if you're using it for... some people not necessarily using the Trikaru for... not Punisher's Crypt, for Steel Fortress, but they're still using the Vertiheal for Steel Fortress. Damage dealt on light. This is actually a lot more beneficial than you realize, this damage dealt on light, because, for example, the dragon in dragons, for example... I don't think I have to say, for example, sorry. For dragons B12, those crystals are not fire crystals. Those are just element neutral crystals. They're light crystals. So damage dealt on light actually has some benefit there. Damage dealt on dark if you're using it for Necropolis. Sometimes you don't use it for Necropolis, so you don't really need it for that. If you're just using the Ikarus and Aster, then you don't have to worry about the damage dealt on dark. But these are just nice guidelines, nice rule of thumb for... Can you guys see that? Okay. Then we have the defense primary stat for Ikaru co-op attack damage. Crit damage if the enemy's HP is more or less. Skill 1 crit damage, skill 2 crit damage. Damage dealt on all the places you'd be actually not... Disregard this. This is not supposed to say damage dealt on wind because you're not really going to be using Trikaru for Steel Fortress. Damage dealt on fire because dragons, light because, as we mentioned, Punisher's Crypt, and also the crystals. Damage dealt on dark because Necropolis. Let's go on to the next one. So now we have the Giants and More dot team. I just put Melee and Soth together because basically you just want a lot of accuracy for them for the most part. Damage taken from water for... You don't really even need these that much. You mostly just want to have accuracy. You want them to land their dots, make them tanky, make them fast-ish, and make sure they land their dots. Tattoo, and also make sure that these survive. Tattoo is skill 1 accuracy. You don't need the skill 1 accuracy. For the most part, Tattoo almost doesn't need anything because she's just there to detonate things every once in a while. That's about it. Then we have Lucian. So Lucian is standard. He's not quite standard. You still have to make sure that he goes before the rest of your team, but that's kind of not the purpose of this video. This is just the stats. This is just the artifact substats that you want on Lucian for things like that, or just in general, really. Then we have standard AO damage dealer. So this is less PvE. This is not PvP. Not PvE. This is PvP. So These all damage dealt on fire, water, wind. If you're using, for example, Poseidon all the time against like fire and water defenses, then you don't really need damage dealt on wind if you're not using it against wind defense. There's always multi-element defenses, but like for example, if you weren't using it against wind units, if you're like, I don't want to put this against a wind monkey or against some of these other wind units on defense, then you don't have to worry about these. Just whatever you're going to bring these into, right? Attack up effect, if you're going to be bringing them with attack power buffers, which you always are. Speed up effect. So speed up effect actually is better for these, right? Damage dealers based on speed. Then we also have skill 3 crit damage. Obviously, things like skill 3 crit damage, which is going to be more impactful than skill 2 crit damage, depending on the units, right? Because units that do skill 2s that are really impactful. I'm kind of circling around some of these that are the skill 2 crit damage ones. Those are going to be more beneficial to have skill 2 crit damage on them than skill 3. Skill 3 crit damage is for like Zyros, for Alicia, for Lucian, for Poseidon, for Julie. Kaki doesn't get any benefit from having skill 2 or skill 3 crit damage because he doesn't crit, right? So Kaki doesn't really get benefit from like half this stuff. So he's really just about the damage dealt on whatever you're going to be taking the Kaki into. And then for the rest of these, you're going to be using crit damage for them. So all of this extra crit damage if the enemy's HP is more, if the enemy's HP is less. Usually you get more benefit from enemy's HP being more. However, units that multi-hit a lot, enemy HP is less, or if they're going second in the team, then crit damage up if the enemy's HP is less is good. And then the one target crit damage is not necessarily as impactful for all of these as the just skill 3 and skill 3, skill 2 crit damage is. So then we have traditional bruiser defense units. We have damage taken from whatever you... If you build a defense that is usually hit by a certain offense team, you want to make sure that you mitigate damage from the elements of that. Like if you're just normally going to get Lucianed or normally going to get Cokied, if those are the things that your defense is being hit by, which you kind of have to ask your guildmates about or ask your friends, like what would you take into this defense? Then you can use these damage mitigation over here for these artifacts. HP is always better than defense for defense bruiser units. With some exceptions, maybe, but for the most part, HP is... For most bruisers, just HP is better than defense, just because ignore defense, defense breaks, and there are a couple exceptions, but for the most part, ignore defense, defense breaks, and additional damage. So then we have crit damage taken, HP when revived. HP when revived is if you're bringing revivers, obviously. Skill 1, 2, and 3 recovery. If your units heal. If they don't heal, then you don't need that skill accuracy. If things need accuracy, if you don't. Like, for example, Carnal over here benefits from accuracy, but Ariel doesn't really benefit. There's skill 1. You don't even need any accuracy on Ariel. Just skill 2 and skill 3 recovery for Ariel is nice. But Carnal, you'd be wanting to go for the accuracy and not the recovery. Obviously, I think that's fairly straightforward, but I don't know why I have to. I don't know why I'm explaining some of these things. But I'm just trying to cover my bases, I suppose. Okay. Sorry, I farted. I was living next to a road where people like to race their cars. So standard bomber. Ciara for RTA is kind of an exception to the rule. Also, the Water Joker is kind of a little different if you're running him as a turn 2 unit that comes back from the dead and puts bombs on. But for the most part, general arena offense or offense of any kind, bomber is accuracy because you want them to land their bombs, and also other things because these units over here, these Cobalt bombers, have other skills that need accuracy as well. Some of these bombers get extra accuracy in their skills. But skill 2, skill 3 accuracy doesn't hurt. Attack up effect because you're going to be putting attack buffs with them. Bomb damage, obviously because it's a bomber. Attack because bombs are based on attack. They can't crit. And then additional damage. So the additional damage, I think people would wonder why this is here. Because you're like, the bombs don't do additional damage based on anything. Ciara, first skill, multi-hits. Cobalt bombers, first skill, multi-hits. I feel that the additional damage is pretty nice on any... Well, the additional damage is nice on anything that multi-hits, but I feel like these are a little bit underrated to put additional damage on them since they do multi-hit. So, I do like to put some additional damage on some of these bomber-type units. CR for RTA is kind of a different situation because she's kind of like a bomber bruiser hybrid kind of thing. So you don't necessarily want to just YOLO with a lot of attack power and accuracy on her. You want to run her differently. You want to put high crit rate on her to turn cycle more. So CR, just the build for CR is completely different. You can actually build CR quite a handful of different ways. So then we have the standard healer. The next slide is kind of similar to this, so we'll kind of glance over the next slide. Kind of similar to a bruiser as well, like a defense-based bruiser, damage taken from fire, water, wind, light, dark. Just mitigate as much damage as possible. And then the recovery here, defense plus portion of lost HP, speed plus portion to lost HP, and HP over here. So just try to stay alive as long as possible, and if you can, speed your unit up so they can cut in and heal some more after the opponent starts doing some damage to them. Next we have standard cleanser reviver. Fairly similar. There's not very much. It's kind of like I did this slide first, and then I was like, started doing this one, and I'm like, this is kind of the same thing. Bruiser style unit that you want to mitigate as much damage as possible. I don't know what I just did. Okay, then we have a standard control for TOA. There are two. Okay, so this is kind of like two different slides almost, because you want just skill 1, skill 2, skill 3 accuracy. That's basically it, and then you do some damage with the continuous damage. You could do some. Well, you could do some additional damage with some of these. I think I mentioned it in. Actually, I think I mentioned it in a future slide, but just a lot of accuracy for control units. It's fairly cut and dry. You don't need to do HP. Some people prefer to have more damage on their control units, but it's really up to you. I feel if there's going to be continuous damage in here or damage based on enemy max HP, then we don't need to go crazy on attack power, and we can just stick some extra HP on there. Skill 2 and Skill 3 crit damage actually is pretty nice for TOA units, for example. If their damage is based on enemy HP, you can blow through the boss stages fairly quickly. For example, all of these units over here do damage based on enemy HP. So for these units specifically, these apply. Skill 2 crit damage, skill 3 crit damage if enemy's HP is more, enemy's HP is less, own one target crit damage. Well, some of these are multi-hits, so yeah. So that doesn't necessarily apply as much as the extra crit damage, but if it's doing damage based on the enemy's HP, crit damage is great on that, right? So then we have, this is fairly standard RTA multi-hitter bruiser. So a lot of these units do multi-hits. So Charlotte does multi-hits with skill 3, Cardinal does multi-hits with skill 2 and skill 3, Shang Peng with skill 3, Moore with skill 2. This one, actually, I haven't even got a chance to play with this yet, but she does multi-hits as well. So I figured let's just stick her in there. We have all of these pandas do multi-hits with skill 1 and skill... Well, not Feng Yan doesn't do skill 2, but Tianlang and Mo Long do skill 2. These guys, these liches have multi-hits. All of these oracles have multi-hits on skill 1. So all of this is just the general RTA multi-hitter bruiser. There's a lot of units that fall under this umbrella, and it's just a general guideline. Some of these, it's not saying every single one of these needs this specific this and no other stats, because obviously some of them benefit from other things, like for example Praha benefits from extra heals. This is not that all of these are the only stats you want on there. It's just a general guideline. So these are just popular RTA units that are like tanky bruisers that do additional damage for their damage output. So you just have a lot of damage here. You have damage mitigation. You have extra damage dealt, which is less important than the additional damage and the damage taken. And then we have accuracy. A lot of these units that happen to do multi-hits are just debuff, attack age reduction units that do other things that you would want accuracy for in general. Like, look at this. Charlotte, you want accuracy for. Carnal, Sheng Peng, Moore, Liu Mei, Mo... Like, all of these units benefit in some way from accuracy. So, maybe Juno less. Like, some of these units less. But, yeah, all these units benefit in some way from accuracy. They have multi-hits. And then we have, and also, remember, HP better than defense for a lot of this stuff. There are some exceptions, but HP is better than defense for a lot of this stuff because additional damage ignores defense. So, then we have defense-based bruisers, which I think really just Copper and Bulldozer, and maybe a couple more fall into this, but this is just offensive damage dealt on whatever you're going to be hitting with these units. Skill 1 accuracy and skill 2 accuracy are okay. You don't need them necessarily because that's not the primary focus of these things. Skill 3 crit damage, that's their big damage dealing potential. Own one target crit damage is really good on these ones because you're going to be sniping single targets with them. Crit damage if the enemy HP is more. If you're going in with Copper and Bulldozer, your enemy's HP is going to be max. That's what you're doing with these. So you're like, if the enemy's HP is less and you're doing this big single target ignore defense, they're going to die regardless. It's kind of pointless. Defensive effect is nice as well. What do we have? Strippers. I'm sorry, I get very excited when I say strippers. Maybe I shouldn't. So Tiana, don't need accuracy 4. Skill 1 accuracy because she's got a defense break. Skill 2 crit damage. I like to have skill 2 crit damage on her. Skill Triton. All 3 skills need accuracy. That's what I like on Triton. Well, that's what you should have on Triton. Skill 1, Skill 2, Skill 3 accuracy for Verisa. Also Skill 2 crit damage. I say this more than Skill 1 because Skill 2 has more damage output than Skill 1. Damage output. This might be weird. This is me. I like to have, because I like to use her against fire units. I always seem to use her against fire units, like for example, Vertiheel or Juno. Because people like to bring those units into control. So I like to have this for Verisa specifically. If you find that you are having, if you're fighting some specific units with some of these units, then maybe you want to tailor your offensive units to fit that specific element that you're going to be fighting against with these. And then we have Chiwu. All 3 skills need accuracy. All 2 skills need accuracy because his 3rd skill is passive. Additional damage is nice on this as well. I mean, you can put additional damage on Verisa as well, but a lot of people like to do more with additional damage because he's got the multi-hits with skill 2. Then we have Gemini's skill 2 accuracy, skill 3 accuracy. We have Bering, skill 2 and skill 3 accuracy. Additional damage because he's got the multi-hits with skill 1. So you do benefit a little bit from that. Then we have the Fire Fairy Isilia. Skill 1, 2, 3 accuracy because everything needs accuracy. Also, big difference if you skill up the skill 3. Like if you don't Devilmon or feed other Second Awakened Fire Fairies to this and you just leave it unmaxed, that's a big change in accuracy. You're going to be smashing your head into a wall. If you guys have her and try to use her without that skill up, it's gonna be nightmare mode because it's gonna be a significant decrease in the amount of strips that she does with skill 3. So all 3 skills accuracy, additional damage because she's got all multi-hits. So many multi-hits. Additional damage is really big on here. Skill 2 and 3 accuracy on Gina. Skill 1 has a dot. You don't really need the dot. I mean, unless you really feel like you need the dot on skill 1. Then we have skill 1 and skill 2 accuracy for the Hey Gang. I also personally like all this damage taken from on Hey Gang because I feel like he gets usually targeted a lot and he doesn't really have too much going on as far as like damage output. I feel. Is anyone using a crit damage like a super damage heavy Hey Gang? I don't know. I never see it, but usually I just find that I like the damage mitigation on Hey Gang. And then this one, we have the boosters. I like crit damage on Bernard. Bernard does good damage with skill 1 and skill 2. So I like the skill 2 accuracy. He only needs accuracy with skill 2. And you usually don't have much accuracy after you're done ruining him because you just want to make him as fast as possible. So skill 2 accuracy is skill 2 accuracy, skill 1 and 2 crit damage, skill 2 accuracy on Megan. Now she has a 2-turn block beneficial effects, and you want to make sure that lands. Usually you're not too worried about the accuracy. With Megan, it's like an afterthought. You're like, I want to make her fast. But the skill 2 accuracy, especially if you're going up against like a Rakan or something like that, that could be very beneficial. And then we have damage dealt on fire. Just again, if you're hitting fire units, because there's fire units on defense all the time. Skill 2 accuracy for Hong Yon. Skill 2 accuracy for Draco. Those are just the things that I like. I mean, you could argue some more as well as this. Also, I do believe she does a skill 1 glancing hit. Doesn't she, the Hong Yan? Skill 1 and 2 accuracy for this. We have Ishir actually can benefit from a lot of stuff. Skill 2 accuracy, skill 3 crit damage, skill 3 accuracy. Additional damage is not bad on him as well. Crit damage if the enemy's HP is less. So here's the thing with Ishir, from what I find, is that when I'm using Ishir's skill 3 on things, I'm hitting things that have low HP. So crit damage up if the enemy's HP is less is much more effective than if the enemy's HP is more, when they're mostly like, you're not going to be really, you're trying to kill things with skill 3 when they're already down, because he's just supporting something else. He's supporting, like, for example, a Leia or a Poseidon on your team. or illusion or whatever. But like usually your opponents are mostly dead, half dead, and then the crit damage if the enemy's HP is less is better in those situations. And own one target crit damage as well. I like additional damage on Kabil. Also, you could do defense break, skill 1 accuracy because defense break. But her skill 2 is a multi-hit, so I actually do like additional damage a little bit on her. Skill 1 and 2 accuracy on Bastet. We have skill 2 and skill 3 accuracy on Orion, defense up proportion. So this is kind of a thing for defense. This is like a me thing, is I like to have defense plus portion to lost HP or speed plus portion to lost HP for Orion. That's just personal preference. And then since this water bounty hunter is likely getting a second awaken at some point, probably not anytime soon, but he is likely getting a second awaken at some point, I just thought I would mention some of these things, even though he's less popular. Additional damage, since he's got a couple multi-hits on skill 1. And then he has this skill 2 that does crazy amount of hits if it activates, if the enemy's HP condition is higher, I believe is the condition that, if the enemy's HP is higher than yours, for some condition for skill 2. But additional damage when he's hitting that many times is really strong. Crit damage if the enemy's HP is more, crit damage if the enemy's HP is less, own one target crit damage, skill 1 crit damage, skill 2 crit damage. It's going to be interesting to see. Well, I mean, you could even go further with this. I just wanted to give a general guideline, but you can, it's going to be interesting to see, as I started to say, what actually happens to him and the other bounty hunters when they are second awakened. If they are second awakened, but they are most likely going to be second awakened. So, just some food for thought. I just wanted to do. I've been wanting to do this video for a while. Hopefully, it helps. I think I'm scared that it probably isn't going to help anyone, because the people that really need to see this are the people that aren't going to click on this, and the people that are going to click on this are going to be the people that already know how to artifact things, and they're just going to be like, I want to see if he said the right things or if he said stupid things. All right. Anyway, that's it for this one. Hopefully someone gets something out of this. I will see you as, I don't know, guys. I should have said more. I will see you, as always, in the next one.